Hello and welcome. Hello and welcome. I'm Eileen Fuchs, President and Executive Director of the National Building Museum. And I'm so excited to welcome you to the inaugural program of this timely and important new program series, Climate ABC. The National Building Museum's mission is to educate and engage people about the built environment and its impact on our lives and on our communities. As a primary driver of global warming, carbon emissions impact everything from the future of coastal cities to record flooding that threatens communities across the country and around the world. The built environment is responsible for nearly 40% of carbon emissions worldwide, and the museum is committed to offering programs that educate and empower innovative and positive action. For over 4 decades, we've presented celebrated exhibitions and programs that have touched on everything from design and construction to social justice and equity issues. And we've been at the forefront of sustainability and resiliency topics, beginning with our 2003 exhibition, Big and Green, and continuing with our series of Smart Growth and For the Greener Good. This program is no exception. Climate ABC, which stands for Action, Building, Community, will focus on 3 essential aspects to addressing climate change. Actions by individuals, businesses, nonprofits, policymakers, civic entities, examples of buildings, both physical structures and landscapes, and communities at every scale that are working to reduce carbon emissions. We are offering dynamic programs designed both to educate everyone about climate action and to drive for substantive solutions in the building industries to mitigate the worst effects of climate change. As the National Building Museum, we tell a national story, and I'm grateful that our program today reaches across continents, highlighting global initiatives and case studies from both Chicago and Paris. International engagement and collaboration is fundamental to success in impacting sustainable change, and our goal is to continue seeking best practices and innovative ideas from across the country and around the world. I want to thank and recognize Wholesome as the lead sponsor of Climate ABC, and Joseph Massett, VP of Strategy and Commercial Excellence, for his role in providing valuable support we needed to undertake this important work. Joseph couldn't be with us today, but he sends a message, so let's take a look at that now.
The built environment has an essential role to play in our transition to a fully sustainable planet. At the Wholesome family of companies, we're proud to support the National Building Museum's Climate ABC series. Innovation, collaboration, looking at the whole picture. All these are key elements to bring real change, and this series touches on each one of them. Taking meaningful steps to minimize our environmental impact is everyone's responsibility. At Wholesome, we take this seriously and are committed to building a net zero future. We're on our way with our low carbon cements and concretes, our recycled aggregates and asphalt offerings, and our roofing solutions that significantly increase the energy efficiency of any building. But we're just getting started. The opportunities to rethink and transform the built environment are substantial. So let's take up the challenge. Let's do it together, and let's do it right now. On behalf of Wholesome, I want to thank the National Building Museum for the opportunity and Eileen for her leadership.
We're really grateful to Wholesome and Joseph for the support to really take on this important work. So I want to thank them again. And I also want to recognize the support we've received from C40 Cities and the important introductions that they've made for us in order to make this program possible. And we're going to hear more from them later. And now it's my pleasure to welcome our moderator, Susan Piedmont-Palladino, who is an architect and director of Virginia Tech's Washington Alexandria Architecture Center. She's also a consultant curator with the National Building Museum and has notably curated Green Community in 2008 and our current exhibition, Justice is Beauty, the work of the Mass Design Group. So please welcome Susan.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. I want to thank you all for joining us from around the world, wherever you are, for this inaugural conversation. As Eileen has said and laid out here, the choices we make about how we design and build the world around us profoundly affect our lives, whether we're designers, policymakers, advocates, or citizens. And in that sense, we're all participants in deciding what kind of future we'll make. Our program today begins with that question, and with the task of reimagining and reinventing our cities, or as one of our panelist organizations, C40 Cities, puts it, quote, "We need the participation of everyone to build a better world." Interesting to think that C40 was founded in 2005 to bring city leaders together to work toward a more equitable and sustainable future. And that same year, 2005, was when the National Building Museum was preparing to open the Greenhouse, New Directions in Sustainable Architecture and Design, which followed Big and Green, which was 2003. And the goal of the Greenhouse exhibition was to bring these issues home, literally, and to let everyone understand that these impacted our everyday, daily lives. But Big and Green was the first. It was certainly the first of many. I have had the opportunity to work with the Building Museum on several exhibitions, such as Green Community, but also on the Intelligent Cities Initiative, Timber City, and others. And so the Building Museum has made a place for itself in this conversation, and I'm glad that we're taking this on today. What I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce our panelists in order of their appearances, and then they will just go one after the other. They will each have about 15 minutes to introduce their work, and then we'll begin a discussion, and we'll be taking Q&A questions from the audience in the chat or in the Q&A section of your screen. Our first panelist will set the framework for the session, and that's Hélène Chartier, who is the head of Zero Carbon Development for C40 Cities. That is the network of global megacities that are committed to the fight against climate change. The team she leads develops programs bringing together cities and progressive players in the built environment sector in order to accelerate our path to zero carbon building and sustainable urban regeneration. Her portfolio includes the Reinventing Cities competition and the Students Reinventing Cities initiatives, as well as C40 activities on net zero districts and the 15-minute city. Prior to joining C40, Hélène was advisor to the mayor of Paris and has also worked for the Paris Urbanism Agency, as well as for the global architecture and engineering firm Arup. After Hélène, we will hear from the designers of two of the winning proposals in the Reinventing Cities competition. C40's ambitious initiative to realize visible live demonstrations of better ways to build. First, to talk about their project, Porte de Montreuil, will be two urbanist architects from Atelier Georges in Paris, part of the winning team Collective for Climate. Both Yvan and Aurelien, Yvan Okotnikoff and Aurelien Delchet, received their architecture educations at the École Nationale Supérieure d'Architecture Clermont-Ferrand. And both Yvan and Aurelien are educators as well as practitioners, teaching in Grenoble and Paris, respectively. Yvan cannot be joining us this morning as a panelist. Hopefully he will tune in again and ask some questions. So Aurelien will be representing the firm. Their practice focuses on innovative processes based on the knowledge of craft, the reinvention of construction principles, and the ingenious implementation of materials. Then we'll turn to Chicago and hear from Thorsten Johann, a design principal in Studio Gang's Chicago office, who is leading the design for Assemble Chicago, the studio's winning entry into the Reinventing Cities competition. Driven by research, ethnographic studies, and real-time data, Thorsten leads many of the design teams working on the studio's award-winning portfolio of large-scale, mixed-use residential projects. Since joining Studio Gang in 2003, he's worked on some of its most high-profile and recognizable projects, including Aqua Tower, City Hyde Park, and St. Regis, Chicago. Originally from Munich, Germany, Thorsten was educated at the Technical University of Berlin. And with that, because we have a lot to talk about today, I will turn the screen over to Hélène.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for making this program. We are very, very glad to see our Reinventing Cities initiative to be featured in such a very important museum and program. And so I'm Hélène Chartier, as Suzanne mentioned, and I'm going to present the Reinventing Cities initiative. But to start, I just wanted to have to give a little bit more background about why we developed this program and the situation around emission from building. So today, 55% of the world population is living in cities, and the projections say that it's going to be 70% by 2050. We know that buildings account for 40% of the global emission, but in cities, it's almost 50% of cities. And in a city like New York, for example, this can grow until 60 and even 70% of emission of the city. So it's a very important part of the emission. The annual energy retrofit rates in buildings are currently less than 1%. So there is, it's really not enough. And we know that a new city the size of New York City is built every month in the world. So the rate of construction is also very, very important, raising a lot of questions around embodied carbon, for example. So the way we plan, design, and build our cities today will really definitely change the world of tomorrow. So just maybe before giving further detail about the program, I just wanted to give a quick overview of the different aspects of the emission. So in terms of building, there is two main categories of emission: operational emissions, which are the annual emissions that are due to the energy used in building, that are the emissions that are quite well known and are quite well tackled in many projects right now. The second category of emission, that's called embodied emission, have been totally underestimated in the past decades. And it's really all of the emission from any construction activities over the life cycle of the building. So if we look at this diagram, I think it's very interesting to understand how these two categories of emission are being developed. What is very interesting with embodied emission is that they come up front in the project. And so when the operational emission are coming every year and over the operation phase of the project. And as we know that we must accelerate and act quickly on decarbonization, more and more people think that embodied emission could be a good way to address emission and reduce our emission impact quickly in the coming 10 years. What are the main targets and pathway on these two main categories of emission? On operational emission, we know how to develop net zero new buildings, so we should definitely aim for net zero operational emission now. And it's very important as well to retrofit existing building, and if we want to align with the target of the Paris Agreement, the objective is to retrofit all of the existing building by 2050. In terms of pathway, the most important of hierarchy, the most important is definitely to minimize energy demand through passive house design and this type of strategy really, and that help to reduce energy demand. It's also to invest in energy infrastructure and at last to decarbonize energy supplies. In terms of embodied emission, we know that it's today impossible to reach zero carbon embodied emission, but a very ambitious target would be already to try to reduce by half the emission of the embodied emission. What is very important first is really to develop, to do life cycle emission assessment right now for every project. And in terms of hierarchy, we think the first element to think when we design a project is really first to prioritize existing assets, to try to avoid building, and it's something very important. Because as I mentioned, a lot of construction happening. And we know that, for example, in a city like Paris, where there is 40% of the occupation rate of a building is only 40%. So there is a lot of thinking as well to develop on how we could optimize the use of existing building, retrofit, refurbish, instead of always building more. The second priority is to use material efficiently. We know that a good design could lead to reduce of material. For example, we know that the underground basement use a lot of concrete, for example. So reducing the number of basement, of underground parking, for example, could be a simple way to reduce embodied emission. It's also about switching to low carbon materials by using material from upcycling that come from a demolition, or also to use low carbon and biosourced materials such as timber or hemp, for example. And also the fourth priority is really to build for the future. So to think about reversible buildings that could change use over the time to avoid demolition, and also to think about disassemblage and the end of life of the building. There is a third category of emissions that is very important, is about, of course, how people live. The designer, the architect don't just build a box, they really build a place where people will live. And the way they design a project, a building, a district can really help to equip and empower people to make lower choice in terms of mobility, but also in terms of construction and consumption and waste. Now, I would like just to give a little bit more background about this Reinventing Cities program. That's a competition that we have organized 4 years ago for the first time. We have already run 2 editions of this competition. And the objective was really to accelerate the development of zero carbon and community-focused projects. So we have discussed with the cities of our networks, and they have proposed underused sites that were ready to be released to develop this type of landmark project. So already 33 projects are under development now, including the 2 that will be presented in Chicago and in Paris today. We ask the participating team to address these 10 challenges for climate that we have defined, and we provided guidance on these different challenges so they can best design their program. It has been a very interesting program because it was not just about developing individual projects, but it has been a really interesting catalyst for change in the cities. Not only because it mobilized a lot of actors, it created a lot of emulation. We had more than 3,000 business who joined this initiative, but also several projects set new national standard. For example, the first zero carbon social housing of Italy, the largest urban solar farm of Texas. The idea was also to mobilize, train, and inspire. So we really try over the process of the competition to train the industry, to train the participants to decarbonize their project, but also train the cities to evaluate the carbon assessment, to evaluate the quality of the projects they receive as a proposition, and to encourage them to adjust their local rules and to involve more important criteria in terms of environmental performance and carbon objective. So just just to give an idea of the diversity and the wide range of actors and very creative agency who've joined this initiative. And just to finish, because I just would like to give a very quick overview of a few other projects. The Assemble Chicago team and the Porte de Montreuil team will describe in detail their great project, but this one is an interesting project in Reykjavik, in Iceland. It's a mixed-use building that aim to achieve a zero carbon across its lifespan. And this project will be the largest wooden building in Iceland. It includes a hybrid concrete base and a structural timber structure with wall and floor made of prefabricated timber panel. The project is also very interesting because they really consider the emission over all of the different steps of the project. So, for example, the team aim to use only a zero emission construction site machinery through the electrification of all of the machinery and building equipment that will be used during the construction phase. Another project interesting, it's a project in Oslo, in Norway, Recipe for Future Living. This is a mixed-use program that will host an innovative startup to encourage ecological living. And in terms of emission goal, the project has a very ambitious objective to be carbon neutral and net zero in energy. And they develop a very innovative approach to reduce 90% of their embodied emission by upcycling local building components and materials for construction. So basically, most of the material that will be used in this project will come from other demolition site, nearby demolition site. This project in Singapore is a former fire station that is converted into a community center. 80% of the existing building will be preserved and retrofitted to net zero. And the project proposed allotment garden for food production. And they propose a very interesting approach for zero waste objective in the operational phase. This project in Milan is one of the largest projects of the competition. It's a 14-hectare mixed-use development that proposes co-living housing, workplaces, and an international campus dedicated to green technology in Milan. It will be the first carbon negative district of the city. And thanks to an innovative energy district system that will not only provide clean energy for the neighborhood itself, but also for the nearby buildings and district. So very interesting. In terms of embodied emission, they aim to reduce 52% of embodied emissions through really a quite holistic approach of clean construction. This project in Montreal is a project that turn a former industrial site into an artistic and entrepreneurial hub. It's aimed to be net zero in operation and to reduce 64% of their embodied emission. And they do that thanks to use of timber for all of the new construction. They retrofit and they preserve most of the existing building, and they develop no underground and no basement to avoid using too much concrete for this underground level. It's also a very interesting project in terms of new green space that will be developed in the site, and also a very interesting approach for developing more sustainable lifestyle in the area. This project in Madrid, in Spain, it's a very different type of project. It will be an innovative hub for clean micro-logistic that will be supplied by green hydrogen, 100% of green hydrogen that will be produced on the site, and that will power all of the fleet for the logistic hub. This project generate also clean energy through solar panel, and that will supply not only the site but also the surrounding neighborhood. And in terms of embodied emission, the building will be built with prefabricated and removable elements, and with made of woods that will come from Spain, that will be certified from Spanish national certified wood. The last project, and I'm stopping here, it's a project in San Francisco, the Kelsey Civic Center. It's a very interesting project that really combines sustainability, but also a very social benefits. It's a project that develops affordable and co-living housing for people with disabilities. And it's also include a program for green business and training for the people that will live there. And they aim to be net zero in operation through production of clean energy, but also very passive house design. A passive design, and in terms of embodied, they will use a mix of low carbon concrete and wood for the structure of the project. I'm stop here. It's already too much, and I want to give as much time as possible for the two winning team of Paris and Chicago. Thank you.
So, hi everyone. Good afternoon, good morning, like you said earlier. So I'd like to talk about the proposition we made for the Porte de Montreuil through different axes. Maybe I'll go full screen. There you go. So the first step, the actions. Just to give a bit of context for our proposition, actually Montreuil, the Porte of Montreuil, is a getaway on the edge of Paris, right on the side of Paris city center. But tomorrow, as you see on the white line, will be in the heart of the Greater Paris, or the Métropole du Grand Paris. And those sites belong to the public realm. I mean, they are sort of derelict areas alongside the périphérique, the boulevard périphérique, the famous infrastructures that surrounds Paris. And this area actually was built where you can find on this site fortifications of the older Paris. And then it was thought as a transition between Paris and Faubourg, Montreuil, and Bagnolet. And then we wanted to, I mean, when I say we, the politics and the city of Paris wanted to tackle that issue and try to cover that infrastructure. And there were many urban propositions and projects to actually address that issue. And today we're actually thinking of pacifying that site infrastructure. So that urban fabric, the Eastern Paris urban fabric, spills over Bagnolet, like I said. And we believe that if you see what you have on the screen, and with Marseille, actually the very dynamic sites here would be, to give an example and some references for our friends across the Atlantic, would be something like Williamsburg or Brooklyn in New York. I mean, you'll find there in this urban fabric some urban forms and built form in which you can find very innovative companies involved, especially in the climate transition and in the economical transition. Before Reinventing Cities, this area was already the subject to many reflections and urban projects. The city policy was very active since the 90s, and there's one right now there's a project on the site right now consisting on enlarging the emblematic Parisian squares. This is led by a local office named TVK that we salute. This is the top left corner image. And today on the site, you'll see quite strong and quite a hostile environment with that infrastructure, that big roundabout that overlaps the motorway type infrastructure. You find a gas station at the bottom. There's a technical center for the city. And there's also a large public parking lot on which you can find the flea market. That flea market is an institution. This is something very important in the history of Paris. It started in the 1860s, and this is a very ambivalent heritage. It's both a very popular parenthesis since that period, 1860, and because of the second-hand goods and all the other dealers and ragman, and so on. And it's also a source of frictions, because you can find, this is a tricky site, you can find illicit street sales that are difficult to contain and tend to invade the streets and the roads, and this is a bit tricky for the city and the people to actually handle that situation. And then for the competition, prior to the competition phase, there's been a pre-selection stage in which our brief was oriented over 3 topics. Like the first one would be a specific way of thinking, a progressive mutation of the flea market would be the first point. Then services for the resilient city we'd like to develop, and then we'd like to integrate into the arc of innovation. This is something in the Greater Paris area to help going forward and in this transition. And then there's a specific way of building for ambitious and ingenious projects, meaning that 100% of the spaces designed as offices are reversible into housing in the short, medium, and long term. And we have a frugal and a biosourced, locally produced design, and a specific way to make the project alive after delivery. This is something very important to us. And this would help the approach, this would help for an adaptable and attentive city with a rigorous scientific evaluation protocol, a governance scheme to promote resilience, and a local and resilience energy mix. And then I'd like to talk about the building. From an architectural point of view, our approach was not to shout, to come out with a slogan like the city of tomorrow will be high tech, or the city of tomorrow will be low tech and frugal. We just engaged a pragmatic approach, testing and trying broadly, very broadly, solutions to aggregate them and find the best ones, telling ourselves that in the narrative of the project, like, we will find the solutions first, find the best solutions first, and then pull them together and get like a proper narrative for the project. We studied, we looked at materials, like been said earlier, the building materials generate a lot of carbon emissions. So we explored different paths with stone, hemp, straw, soil, timber structure. And we analyzed them, studied them from a technical point of view, and also we study and survey them also on the maturity and the capacity of the industries, the local industries, to actually serve the project. Because these in France are quite new, they're coming back, but not entirely adapted to that scale of project or those ambitions. And then the ambition of, well, I mean, we left aside the idea of a strong architectural gesture here. We thought that the site did not need an extra object like a kilometer-long building or another mega building or super infrastructure. But we thought here buildings would or should allow or stimulate new connections and links between Paris, which is at the bottom of the screen, and Montreuil and Bagnolet, which is on the top side of the screen. So you can see the buildings are emerging and just next to the playgrounds here. And we also realized that from our shared objectives, the professional rules and specific to the materials we intended to use, and the planning regulations and of the city of Paris, the project tended to converge by themselves. Like, we developed something that was a coherence, or they were look-alike, but a little bit different at the same time. And so this was a strong position for us, and we tried to amplify that coherence to also enter in resonance with the diversity of the neighborhood buildings. So you can see here in that image, the white blocks here are existing buildings from both sides of the périphérique, a little bit of Paris, a little bit of Montreuil, Bagnolet, and we got our inspiration, and the brown buildings are our propositions. And we try to develop that family of buildings. They talk to each others, and we liked a lot, the idea that we don't invent the city of tomorrow from our offices or practices internally, but we reinvent it from what is already there. And then talking about community, because this is quite a strong subject here on this site. The Collective for Climate is a project community over the Porte de Montreuil. The Collective for Climate assembles 70 structures. You see 4 architecture offices: Bond Society, Tatanio Bilbao Studio, Seri Architects, Atelier Georges, which is us, and environmental engineers acting under the name of ZEFCO. And then we had 3 developers: Nexity, Crédit Agricole IMO, Engie Air Nouvelle. Quite a lot of people around us, around the table. 70 is quite a lot. I can't name them all. So, like I said earlier, there were a lot of studies prior to Porte de Montreuil, but in 2015, 2 major urban studies, Porte du 20e, Piton du Vernois, and then there's the Porte de Montreuil coming. But in between that, there's a mandatory process of public consultation. So you have 3 different major dates appearing on the screen, and this is part of the process of those 2 first urban design studies. And then there's been another round of public consultation. It's called Part 2 in 2018. Which was led independently from the project, but led by the public authorities to figure out what to do and over that area, which is a bit tricky as there's so many people using and living in that area. And then after Porte de Montreuil, next year when we'll start the first stage of developing the project, there's going to be another stage of public consultation, but this time led by a private sector, and which we are part of. And we have proposed to orientate over 2 themes, the one of inclusion and the one of the programmatic prefiguration, which is actually today, which still has to be brought together and synchronized with the local authority and the developers. We have to put them or make sure they sit around the table and all the ambitions and the will of developing this site goes one way, the same way. And during this Part 5, what we intend to do is also to set up the carbon fund, and there's another scientist board to assess or survey the project and go along the project and make sure that we reach the goals. And on top of that, we have developed a strong interest about the production of low emission carbon materials, the prefabrication. We just want to make sure that all the industries, like I said, timber, clay, hemp, hay, and all the others could be ready, or we could help them be ready for that project and that type of project with such ambitions. And a final word to conclude. We present a project today that is part of something we see emerging after a period where urban design ecology is trying to find itself in a more integrated process, as we have a very sequential tradition of planning in France. And so, well, and that raises a question of the public management of those private initiatives to actually make a better tomorrow.
I'm here today on behalf of Jeannie Gang, our founding principal, who's sorry that she couldn't make it herself. I'll do my best to fill in for her. As mentioned, I'm here in her stead to introduce Assemble Chicago, which is our winning entry to the downtown Chicago C40 competition, which we were very excited about participating in because it picks up on many of the threads that drive our designs, with strong focus on the users on both the local equity scale as well as the global sustainability scale. There we go. That's the project. As was previously mentioned, C40 outlines 10 goals with the target of decarbonization, and added to this particular Chicago iteration were 10 goals set by the Department of Planning and Development that revolve around topics like equity, Chicago authenticity, economic impact, and connection to the public realm. And this matrix that you see on the screen here was our way of tracking these goals, many of which I'll touch on in the upcoming slides. The site the city made available for this competition is really amazing. It's located in the South Loop next to excellent public transit and amongst some of the nicest historic buildings in Chicago, such as the Fisher Building right across the street. And it's also surrounded by various cultural institutions like Roosevelt University, Columbia College, and of course, Harold Washington Library that you can see to the lower left there on the left image. Critically, the site is also adjacent to another city asset, Pritzker Park. However, as you know, if you've been there recently, it's not really working to its full potential at the moment. So in summary, it's an extremely rich site that has a lot of potential, and the competition asks to maximize the site potential, but without any pre-described or predefined program goals. The idea that our developer partners, the community builders, or TCB, approached us with then was picking up on the issue that Chicago downtown, like many other downtowns, is struggling with. And that was a direct response to the question of equality, housing equality. Chicago's downtown is one of the fastest growing real estate markets, and with the cost at the highest within the city, which means that a lot of the required workforce cannot afford staying in that area. So the first idea was truly affordable workforce housing. And as you can see on this chart, we're looking at 200 units on a spectrum of 35 to 75% AMI, which is the area median income. You know, I think that's really remarkable when you look at some of these cost ranges. And those units would be reserved only for qualifying applicants. So the result would be that it puts workers near their workplace, which in many ways is inherently sustainable and good for a lower carbon footprint already. But the goal was not only to help local workers, but make a building that helps the whole city, with a focus on communities and neighborhoods that typically don't have easy access to downtown. So to address that, the second idea is that there's a podium to the building that houses a rich ensemble of amenities that are not only for the residents, but that are specifically configured for the use of community organizations from all around town. We're calling this space the Neighbor Hub, and I'll talk about in a little bit more detail what that is exactly on some of the following slides as well. TCB, our developer, has a dedicated development arm called Community Life, who already run a network of community assets like this one. And we already started conversations, even during the competition, with a good number of groups on what a space like this could look like. Viewed from the park, the podium program includes a food hall that will feature rotating vendors from all around Chicago to give them a chance to tap into a downtown market that, they would otherwise be almost impossible for them to access. And at the same time, that would be providing affordable food for residents in the neighborhood. There's a flex space with an operable facade towards the park for things like art shows and co-working, etc. But it's also seating for the food hall during the cold months. So truly sort of a, changing kind of character to that space. And there's the main entry to the neighbor hub, purposefully facing the park. And then on the floor above that, we have a column-free multi-purpose room with a pre-function area that is connected to the park via this tribune stair. These are the podium plans that show the food hall on the lower left in yellow. TCB also has an agreement with Rush Hospital, the local hospital here in town, to run a community clinic for residents and friends that provides rotating health services, including mental health and optometry, expanding on similar collaborations on the other developments. And then there's the flex space on the right side of level 1, and then of course the residential lobby and associated spaces on the upper left. Level 2 features the multi-purpose room in purple on the right, and the pre-function with access to that tribune stair. And the other component on level 2 is that TCB has committed to renting a large part of that floor, which is a critical part of the finance structure, because they will be renting that space at market rates. And then on the third floor is tenant amenities such as a gym, and then a garden terrace with a special sort of gardening teaching room. And I'll touch on that again a little bit later. And then of course, a resident lounge. I've previously mentioned Pritzker Park, and we were very excited that the competition brief invited us to make the park part of our thinking. While it'll remain Park District property, TCB made a sizable commitment to making this park much more activated and in a symbiotic relationship with our building. And that would not only help our project, but can act as a much needed anchor space on State Street, which is one of the main shopping streets in Chicago. And it has been identified and analyzed as being too monoculturally shopping, with no amenities that would invite shoppers, but also residents and students to take a moment and spend some time in a more civic and restful experience. So to enliven the park, we and our landscape partner Site Design Group came up with a concept that defines 4 different areas that have varying degrees of urban to natural character, and all of them with opportunities for users to interact, such as the already mentioned tribune stair that connects the upper levels of the neighbor hub of to the park, while providing space for public restrooms on level 1. And they're also serving as bleachers for staged events in the park. And then there's the addition of a few large caliber regional trees for shaded outdoor areas, and a number of topographic modifications to the ground plane that provide opportunities for seating, but also can be used and will be used for stormwater retention. Critically in all this, the building and its public accessibility program are directly connected to the park, visually as well as via a series of large openings. So this is another view from the park, looking back at the building and some of those spaces and how they're oriented to the park. And I think we also think the park could be a great opportunity to provide areas for public art. This is a view of the other side of the building and how it fits within the urban context. You can see the entries of the residential part in the back, and then the Rush Community Clinic in the middle, and the food hall on the front corner there. There's also a small grocery store. Above that, you can see the other program component, which is the workforce housing, which I'll get into a little bit more now. Because the site is short and wide, the units and the unit sizes are compact. They feature living rooms and bedrooms in a stacked layout, which allows the units to be narrower and deeper than a traditional unit and create a more efficient floor plate. A side effect that creates is a home office nook, which we felt was quite timely when we were designing this due to a lot of work from home needs that had come up at that time. Zooming into one of the units a little bit more, this setup also helps to deal with some of the environmental conditions, where by making the big living room window a fixed pane and letting the smaller north-facing window be an operable window, we maximize daylight while at the same time limiting noise pollution from the nearby trains that are just south of our building. And of course, providing natural rental control while controlling solar gain is also a simple means of to retain comfort in power outage and improve resilience that way. This design also retains a glazing ratio of around 25%, which of course is critical to the sustainability approach. Another thing the resultant facade texture is doing for us is that it visually relates to the historic context of the surrounding that I mentioned, which has this vertical expression and this relative solidity. Many of these surrounding buildings feature vertical bands of what has come to be known as the Chicago window. And we definitely see our building inspired by that historic tradition. The challenge then, of course, was how to match what we like about the surrounding buildings, but with a much increased environmental performance to meet our competition goals. And to get there, we had the support of TT Facade Consulting, who were super helpful at finding the right balance of performance and materiality cost, with lightweight materials being a critical consideration. Also essential to finding a balance is module sizing that minimizes parts and pieces while maximizing constructability, which in this case meant the ability to install panels without crane use. And of course, the increased quality of shop assembled modules also helps to ensure that the acquired airtightness of the facade is possible. Beyond the facade performance, we're proposing a whole number of other integrated strategies, such as no vehicle parking, which, as mentioned before, means no basement, harvesting and reusing rainwater, avoiding the use of natural gas, implementing biodiverse gardening opportunities both on the roof as well as in the park, and the introduction of a comprehensive waste reduction protocol for the residences as well as the food hall. But in order to get to true carbon neutrality, the most important strategies are, as mentioned before, again, minimizing the embodied carbon to make sure that the offset we have to deal with is as minimal as possible. And then energy creation to offset the footprint over time. In regards to embodied carbon, we had a long and animated discussion with the team, including our structural engineers, as well as pre-construction services contractor that we had on board. And then, and of course, TCB looking at the budget of all that. And all of that to decide what kind of structural materiality makes the most sense. And we finally, in this case, decided on using a concrete mix that reduces cement by 80% for a carbon reduction of 20%, but at a significantly lower price and limited or reduced construction time. So that decision didn't only save cost and ensure permittability, but it also helps to advance an industry that is the basis of much construction globally, which we believe goes towards how our project can be exemplary and competitive for others. On operational carbon, the good news is that we were able to reduce the energy consumption to about half of a benchmark building, mostly by virtue of the facade and building systems. But that said, on the energy on-site energy creation is really limited in a dense urban site like this one, where there's simply no room for the PV that's needed. So for reference, we have some PV panels on the roof, but they're really only able to provide about 3.7% of the building use. And the alternatives are to installing solar panels off-site or buying offsets. And as a team, we agreed that buying offsets is absolutely not in the spirit of this competition, even though it is the cheapest option. That's like a whole separate problem. But the good news was that TCB committed to providing solar panels on some of their other residential developments in town. And what I like about it is that it creates the energy that we need for our building now, but it creates over time as the grid starts to go green over the next 10 to 30 years. It provides a revenue source for that neighborhood. So that's another way of how we feel this sort of idea of not understanding the building just as an individual project, but as part of a larger network, can really start to change the discussion. A similar idea is that there are some gardening initiatives in some of the other TCB projects, and some kind of information and amenity exchange there is another idea of bringing the city together as a network. And that brings me back to basically the idea of the building not just an individual project, but it's part of a larger network, and as a way to reinvent cities. With that, I hope I haven't gone too far over the time.
I had a lot of questions, but we have a fantastically engaged audience, and they've posed some really good questions. And so I have a few that I'll hold back of my own, but I want to go to some of the audience questions. Some of them have been answered in the Q&A, but I think they deserve a sort of larger discussion. So a couple of them take two different paths, one leading to questions about really public policy and the sort of framework of how to make things happen. And then there are a few questions about technology. And I think following up on Thorsten, your presentation most recently, let's start with you. And there was a question, there was a first question from Jenna, who asked a really simple but great opportunity. What technology or strategy excites you most? And we'll start with you, Thorsten, but Aurelien, I know you were talking about some novel and innovative materials. And I also want to hear from Hélène from the perspective of the competition organizer. But Thorsten, what excites you most in terms of technologies or strategies? Were there things you did that were brand new, research you did that opened up new opportunities? What excites you?
Yeah, great question. There's definitely a couple of strategies that we put a pretty good amount of research in, even just within sort of a 3-month competition period. One certainly is the collaboration with our facade team to make sure that within a budget, right? Because that's the interesting thing about the C40 competitions is that it's not just throwing out every idea that you possibly have, but there is a commitment, and there's like a dotted line where you sign and you have to, this has to become real. So to go through some of that work with our consultants and also a couple of manufacturers that we talked to, and just bringing an R value from a 19 to a 30, within a certain sort of constraint there was definitely a very interesting conversation. The other thing we're talking about in our building that I didn't mention here in my little introduction is that we are looking to make this building smart to some level. So that would mean that there is a cell phone app that's very easily accessible to residents. And that will tell them things like, when is a good time to open the window? Some information about trash, other information just generally about water and energy use that can sort of be like a small way of understanding their environment a little bit better and sort of owning this whole sustainability topic a bit more, because that's and without going too far, but I feel like the way to sort of make these systems work is to make it easy to use and to make the users feel ownership of them. And, that was one of the relatively simple ways that I felt like can go a long way, and that would also probably be pretty reproducible.
Great, thank you. Aurelien,
Yes.
what excites you most in terms of new technologies or strategies?
Our strategies. Well, we are Atelier Georges practice. So we started that office with three of my partners. Yvan is one of them, but we were very focused on the process and not not only the design. Or the design would be there's a metaphor. The design would be the destination, but what excites us more is the path, or the way we take to reach that destination. And we apply that metaphor through a lot of our urban design projects. And here is, this is quite a great thing for us to do, to step aside, but use that approach and step aside from the urban design and focus on the building, because low material emissions, we know they all exist and they've been on for a long time in our old world or continent, the old continent. I mean, building with timber, clay, hay, hemp, or soil, I mean, it already it exists for centuries, and it's very territorialized. The thing is, what we try to do, and very exciting what we did this year, we reached and contacted and made a lot of meetings to assure that those industries would be ready to actually be part of that transition and get bigger and face the demands and the delays, invent new solutions, because the programs are different, the buildings are different, and the way we use and leave those buildings are different too. So this was the excitement for us to work alongside with ZEFCO, the engineers. This is a new way of working, a new way of seeing things, and that was gold. That was fantastic for us.
Great, thank you. And Hélène, from your perspective, because these are cities all over the world, and so there's strategies that work in certain locations because place matters, climate, resources. So from your perspective, what are the technologies or strategies that your collective, your group is excited about?
I think, and it's a little bit similar to what Aurelien just said, I think it's not just a question of technology, it's really a question of mindset. I remember David Chipperfield, the British architect, was saying real estate is very good to innovative, but not too innovative on the good things, on what really matters. So I think the question is really to change and to put really the emission reduction objective at the core of the designs. That means educating architects, educating ourselves on life cycle assessment. And now there are a lot of tools that are such as Tally, such as One-Click LCA, that are available and are quite easy to use for architects to really integrate this question at the heart of their design workflow. They produce data at quite speed and good resolution to really support the design decision. And I think it's really very important. Each step of the design, you really think about each decision. And if I can make a parallel, I think there is a lot of discussions these days about carbon budget, and I quite like these ideas. That means, for example, when you design a project, you always think about the financial impact of your decision. And I think that's exactly the same mindset that we need for carbon now. That means every decision you make, you need to think about, okay, what does that mean in terms of emission and everything? And if I make a parallel with this carbon budget and how city works, there is now cities such as Oslo in Norway who have include this carbon budget in the way they organize their city. Every decision the city made, they calculate what is the impact in terms of carbon. And I think that's exactly what we need for buildings, project, urban development project, really to put this question at the heart of the decision making.
And I think, often when we get a conversation about technology, there's people on the technology side who say, well, we know how to solve this, but watching the 2 weeks in Glasgow, we know what are the other challenges. And we had a question from Rick that was actually quite specific about tax issues. And I'll read his question, but I want to frame it as a larger question about the role that public policy, all of the work that has to be developed in the political and policy realm to try to make these things possible. Rick asked about, he commented that retrofitting existing buildings is very important, but that doing this will increase the value of these buildings and increase their tax liability. And so is this tax on privately created building value, is this counterproductive, is his question, by making energy savings from retrofits more expensive? And there's obviously a long conversation about initial costs versus operating costs. And Rick's raised this in terms of tax policy. Hélène, you represent, again, global cities, each of which is in a very different political world. And so I know that you did give a quick answer to him on the Q&A, but I thought it deserved bigger discussion. And I'm curious also if Thorsten and Aurelien can speak from their own municipalities, if there's any sort of discussion about how to change these frameworks, about how we value those buildings. Hélène, I'll let you try to take it first.
Yeah, it's not an easy one. I think first, definitely retrofitting building is probably the most important urgency. And that's not the most popular one. I was discussing with someone in a city who was telling me that, for example, when they develop a design competition for new building, they have 300 entries. They develop a competition for retrofitting, repurposing, they have 10 submissions. So there is also something of making this type of project sexy, important. I think that's the first thing. In terms of financial, there is a lot now. There is an expression in French who say, when the real estate goes well, everything goes well in terms. And I think that, which mean really that, and we have seen a lot of, when there is a boost in the economy, like global deal and everything, they try always to give money in the real estate because it's really helped to boost the economy. The main challenge here was to inject the money, not for new construction, but for this type of renovation. And we have seen a lot in this recovery, Green New Deal and everything. We have seen a lot of nation and city to try to put some the money to accelerate renovation and retrofitting instead of just injecting money for real estate in general and more construction and everything. And I think that's a good sign, and that's something we need to continue and to develop.
Thank you. I don't know if Thorsten or Aurelien, typically architects aren't that conversant on tax policy. We just deal with what affects us. Thorsten, Aurelien, anything you wanted to add to the question of policy or that framework?
Just to say, I mean, I think it's one of the reasons we were super excited about C40 is because some of the sort of difficulties of getting other irregular sort of market rate projects to be more sustainable, those reasons have already been taken away because the city has already sort of a business as usual project wouldn't have had a chance here, right? So that's a great. I think it's a great thing when cities can take initiative, and we are more than happy to sort of help and participating in projects like that. The other thing to say is that I think it's a very valid concern because sustainability really only makes sense if it can be achieved for all. So the concern of taxes going up. And then so those kinds of building not being available anymore for the whole spectrum of society, that's definitely a problem. And then also just wholeheartedly agree, reuse is I think one of the most effective and easiest ways of being sustainable. I was very interested in the project that you mentioned earlier, and I wasn't familiar with it. You said it was reusing 90% of the construction materials. I'm definitely going to look into that. I mean, we're looking into that. We have versions of that in some of our work, with adaptive reuse to various degrees. But I mean, I think somehow, not to take the sort of onus away from designers, but there's definitely a policy need to not make that a burden.
Thank you. Great answer. Aurelien, anything you want to add before we move to sort of some final questions?
My connection was a bit tricky, so I didn't get the question properly.
It was about tax policy, so maybe we'll move. Maybe we'll move on. And we have so much to talk about, but time is pressing on us. And as you guys know, we had a set of questions that we really want to make sure that we're going to open up to all of our panelists throughout this series that really get at the A and the B and the C, the action, the building, and the community. And so one of these has to do with communications. The Building Museum is in the communications business. That's what we're doing right now. And I'm just curious if anyone wants to weigh in on what needs to change in how we communicate to our communities. Are we listening to everyone we need to listen to in order to get to the decarbonization targets that we're after? And so this really has to do with how we learn how to listen. How do we need to change from the perspective of the architects? Anything we need to do as a profession, as designers, to change how we communicate to our communities. Aurelien, you want to take that one?
Yes. Well, it is very important. Well, there has been in France at least a lot of debates on public consultation, because most of the time public consultation was just to inform people about the project that was going on, and letting people thinking that letting people think that they would be part of the project, but actually they had no hands on the project. They could not change anything. The process was going on and they were just being consulted. What we tried to do recently, I mean, over the last 10 years, and this is something more recurrent in the processes, is to involve them in the process of developing either the public realm schemes or the programs of the ground floor. You have many subjects you can implement and choose. So what we did with clients, we set up a few workshops with sort of panelists or a community of projects. The public would volunteer. So either new inhabitants or local habitants would subscribe, would be part, would get involved into that community of project and be part of those workshops oriented with themes. So, for example, this month we'll talk about the shops and what would happen in the ground floor, and then next week what would be the program for the public realm, and you would go on. And most of the time this works. It worked really well in Nantes, west side of France, because the political the politics were involved in that process. The client was involved in that process too, and the designers were there too. And we had also a whole group of specialists talking about biodiversity uses, and so many other experts. Of course, we don't take everything for granted, but we have to clean a little bit all the propositions. But if you get them really involved as early as you can with the elected people, the politics involved in that process, most of the time you go quite far, and you see the benefits on your propositions at the end.
Great. Thorsten, any thoughts on your end about how we need to change how we communicate?
Well, I think one general thought is that sometimes I feel it comes across as if, in the States at least, as if, developers are not interested in like creating buildings that are more sustainable. But I want to sort of like open that focus a little bit more and say, I mean, this is a whole industry, right? Like developers create buildings based on what the market is giving, and the market has certain expectations. And then the designers are working with the developer. So there's like a whole cycle. And I think that everybody needs to listen to everybody, and we all have to work together in order to really make change. I was listening to Aurelien with some of I'm just kind of like imagining building a building out of straw and hemp here in the States. And I feel like, there's a lot to learn here and I think progress to make. And I think everybody has to sort of work together. And there's some really good signs that we've got some clients that are very interested in some of those innovative approaches.
Great. So that sort of leads to one of the other questions, which is, and Hélène, I'll toss that to you first. One of the objectives of the competition was to serve as, quote, a model for carbon neutral development, demonstrating innovative and replicable climate solutions and providing local community benefits. What about the decision to have a competition, and what about these projects is transferable to other communities? What can other communities learn from this effort, this competition, and from the other winners?
No, I think that was a very important aspect for us. Two things, actually. The first thing was to make sure that the project that would be developed was not going to be very pricey, net zero project and I think the example, both examples, but maybe the one in Assembled Chicago is very interesting in that sense, because if we create a model of carbon neutral building that is only for expensive building and everything, that's absolutely not something that can be replicable and everything. So that was very important. And also what we have seen is that definitely we told the team, we are not interested for innovation for innovation. It's not the objective of this competition. The objective of this competition is to propose models that are financially viable, that really can propose solutions that can be replicable and everything. And we are quite happy in that sense, because we have seen several projects. I mentioned the one in Oslo earlier, the one with upcycling elements from nearby demolition site. This one, basically the mayor of Oslo met with the team and say, okay, how we could scale that in the city. And they are now working to organize a form of fair between demolition site and new construction site to try to facilitate this type of transfer between materials from demolition site to new construction. And that's something that is not easy to do, but when you have one example that is supported by the public authorities and then they try to scale it, you can make a difference. And when you look at what's happening, for example, in Amsterdam on this topic, it is possible. So I think to make things, and just one thing, I think there is something, we need the step between the ideas and the mainstream. We need, at one point, we would need to go to rules. It would need to be the city rules. You will have to submit a LCA for every building permit. You will have to reach 50% of embodied emission. But we know that we need to prepare the building sector. That's why this type of competition, it's really the objective. And I quite like what Thorsten say. The idea as well of this competition is to say to the city, you cannot always ask the project to be innovative, to be good, if you don't create space where you don't judge a project only on money and on other things. You need to incorporate this type of element in your criteria, in your procurement. Otherwise, it's very hard for designers to push and to discuss with their developer and investor on this type of topic. So the idea is to help to use this type of initiative to leverage, and then in the future, we hope it will become the new norm and the new procurement process.
That's a great answer, and I think it's, we had a question in the chat from somebody who was curious about how this affects smaller cities or jurisdictions that aren't the major global cities, which is basically part of what this question is. But you're also sort of throwing down a challenge to the design professions, in addition to planners and politicians. And Thorsten, Aurelien, I think our last question is really, what do we as designers, architects, urbanists need to change in our practices to get carbon neutral? How do we look at our own practices? How do we try to affect change? Certainly doing demonstration projects like this is hugely important, but we'd like for this to become the normal, not the special, right? So are there any things you guys wanted to comment about the profession, about education, which of course is my business, so maybe I'm asking you to throw me the challenge back. at architectural education. But if you have a few more comments before we close it up and I toss it back to Eileen, we'll let you guys have the last word. Thorsten, do you want to start?
I'm just going to build on something that was said earlier. The 10 participants when it comes to a reuse project. I think that's I can kind of see why that's happening. There's obviously a lot of sort of like personal sort of like, I don't know, ego sometimes, or just I don't know, wish to expression that that we as designers, want to maximize. But I think that certainly at Studio Game, we totally see the same level of opportunity in reuse projects. And I'd like to think that we are one of those 10, but it is a little bit sort of going out of the traditional comfort zone. And I'm sure I think for everybody, again, the whole process has to be going a little bit outside everybody's comfort zone.
Great. Aurelien?
Well, those competitions are very, very helpful. If you think in a way, the financial pressure is strong enough in those metropolises that you have room to experiment and push things forward, develop new things, help setting up new industries, put them back to life again, help them develop and get bigger to answer other questions, and to apply those, and then you can transfer that to the other territories. And the governments as well is a model transferable. We're doing so in rural France, west of Paris. The thing is, you need to approach your practice in a different way. Of course, we designers, we don't only design buildings. I think we design processes too. This is a key element. I think this is the main thing to say, because you can be engaged or involved into the transition. I have architect friends who've been building timber construction for over the last 20 years, and they've never built a concrete building, but this is their conviction, and this is free to everyone. I mean, this is up to everyone. But if you go into the processes and you push things forward with those competitions, and you apply the government's strategy, maybe we can go somewhere. I think I'm convinced we will go somewhere.
That's as good a summation as any. I think that's fantastic. And Thorsten, your reference to getting out of our comfort zone as designers, climate change is making us all uncomfortable. And so having designers sort of address this directly, I think is great. And I'm very optimistic having seen these projects. So I'm going to turn this over to Eileen. I want to thank the audience and thank all of you. I've really enjoyed this conversation. I wish we had more time. Eileen, would you like to make some concluding remarks?
Yeah, thank you so much, Susan and Thorsten and Hélène and Aurelien, for this really great program and for connecting those dots and for asking these questions at the end about how do we communicate. The museum certainly wants to be a platform to kind of make all of these complex, important issues more accessible to more people. And in that spirit, I would ask everyone in our audience you're gonna receive a survey. Please let us know what you think, what you thought, how are you inspired in some way, how we can make things better. I love this conversation to talk across our world and to feel the commitment of so many of us, and we all can play a part, right? And that's what the museum wants to really communicate. So thank you for just being so thoughtful with these amazing presentations, and thank you to C40. And I want to conclude by trying once again to thank our incredible lead sponsor, Wholesome. And thanks everybody.